So my name is Neil McFarlane. I'm the moderator today, and I work for UNISDR as Chief of the DRR program. What we'll do today is it's basically a launch of this very important initiative around building disaster resilience to natural hazards in the Sub-Saharan Africa. And I'd like to introduce all our panelists first, and then we have a very short movie, we have a couple of opening statements, and then we'll ask the other panelists to explain what their results of the program and their contributions are to it. Then see if there's any questions from the floor, and then do a quick summary with our panelists. So it's going to be a bit tight on the timing, so I do ask our panelists to please be quite brief, and also to move along the agenda. So let's first start with introduction of the panelists. First of all, we have, of course, Her Excellency Rhoda Peace, who's the Commissioner for the Rural Economy and Agriculture at the African Union Commission. We have Margareta Wallström, the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, on my far right. We have Mr. Hardwick Schaefer, the Vice President of the Operations Policy and Country Services from the World Bank Group. And we have Mr. Justice Kubamera, who's the coordinator of the Climate Development Special Fund from the African Development Bank. And we have a late entry, Christine Vicente Ruiz, who's the Program Officer here for the EU. We are still waiting for some of the EU delegation to come. We're not sure where they are, but hopefully they'll come through. If not, I'm sure Christina will fill in nicely. So I think what we'll do now is first start with the movie, and then I'll ask our two special opening statement guests to make their opening statements. But let's show a quick 4-minute movie first.
In March 2015, 185 member states came together at the 3rd UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Sendai, Japan. They agreed on a new global plan for the next 15 years called the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. It aims to build the resilience of countries and communities worldwide against hazards, and its measures are already being carried out in every region of the world. Over 115,000 lives are lost each year as a result of disasters, and the economic cost is vast, up to $300 billion annually. Globally, significant progress has been made, but there is still work to be done. Disasters hit Sub-Saharan Africa hard, with 2 significant events every week affecting 12.5 million people per year. Meanwhile, many countries in the region are experiencing unprecedented growth and urbanization, yet 400 million people live below the poverty line. The Sendai Framework could help reduce poverty by helping countries to become more resilient.
We had a lot of lessons learned. Africa is one of the continents which is experiencing a lot of disasters. And as you know, the limitations in Africa are still high. We still have a lot of poverty. We still have limited resources to respond. And at the same time, Africa is faced with climate change-related disasters. People must know what disaster risk reduction is.
Coordination across the region is crucial. The 5th Africa Regional Platform in Abuja agreed on a post-2015 framework on disaster risk reduction for the entire continent. This ensures that lessons and knowledge are shared, fostering cooperation and partnerships across the region. By coordinating policy and sharing data, we can implement the most effective measures across sub-regions. Most disasters in Africa are related to water and climate. The right tools for weather monitoring can mean that risk is reduced and our communities are made safer. Development cannot be sustained without implementing DRR practices. With better risk knowledge, resilience can be built, and knowledge can be spread, engaging new generations as never before.
Young people have access to information, have access to avenues of releasing that information that other generations don't necessarily understand or are able to use as well as young people. And this is so key in implementing this framework because we need to get that information out there. We need people to understand processes. We need people to take ownership of them. And youth are the perfect agents of change for this.
Community resilience can be strengthened through universal, robust insurance policies. Risk financing, coordination and knowledge sharing will have a significant impact on the lives of communities across the region. The implementation of a programme to build resilience in Sub-Saharan Africa is underway, funded by the European Union as part of support to the African Caribbean Pacific Group of States. It is coordinated by the African Union and supported by the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, UNISDR, the World Bank and the African Development Bank. It aims to provide a comprehensive regional risk management framework for Sub-Saharan Africa. It will enable implementation of the Sendai Framework in the region to sustain development gains and build resilience. Working together, thousands of lives will be saved and millions will be protected from the impact of disasters.
Sendai Framework is making the difference for resilience in Africa.
I think let's get started. I'll first I'll have two opening statements from first the African Union Commission and then the European Commission. But actually wrote a piece. You have the floor for your opening statement.
Thank you, moderator, and let me welcome Your Excellency, Madame Margareta Wallström, Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, distinguished panelists, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor and pleasure for me to welcome you all on behalf of the African Union Commission and indeed on my own behalf to the launch of the European Union, African, Caribbean and Pacific Group of States Disaster Risk Reduction Program, that is, building disaster resilience to natural hazards in Sub-Saharan African regions, countries and communities. I wish to convey warm greetings from Her Excellency Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who is the chairperson of the African Union Commission. She appreciates the Europeans' continued support to further the disaster risk reduction agenda and build disaster resilience in Africa. Africa is confronted by a range of natural and human-induced hazards and associated risks and disasters with droughts and floods, being major ones severely affecting the continent. Perhaps to briefly say that over the last decade, it is estimated that Africa may have lost an equivalent of 1.3 billion shillings as economic loss. And then also for human loss, the estimation is about 700,000 lives. And these mainly relate to floods, to droughts, and other natural disasters. Climate change and climate variability has been and will continue to be a major factor amplifying the socio-economic impacts of disasters on the continent. Guided by the extended program of action for the implementation of the Africa Regional Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction and the Hyogo Framework of Action, Africa has undertaken a broad range of measures, including by putting in place policy, legal, and also have institutional frameworks and mechanisms for disaster risk reduction and responses at all levels. As a result, I can say that it is really recognized that there is encouraging progress towards reducing vulnerability and exposure to disaster and climate risks and associated disasters, as well as mortality, especially those related to floods and droughts. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, despite such encouraging achievements, the frequency and intensity of disasters have been increasing at an alarming rate, indicating that disaster and climate risks still remain major impediments to sustainable development. In 2015 alone, we have witnessed flooding in Southern Africa. We have had Ebola epidemics in West Africa. We have had droughts and flooding in the Sahel and Horn of Africa with a significant impact on lives and livelihoods and long-term socioeconomic consequences. This means that we are at the stage where we need to join hands and take urgent actions to advance the DRR agenda and hence to be able to arrest the current trend. Actions we need to take at all levels urgently should be risk-informed and focus primarily on addressing the underlying risks drivers in the context of sustainable development. We have now a global instrument available at our disposal, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030, to guide us in our efforts to promote risk-informed development and investment at all levels on the continent. We are grateful to Her Excellency Margareta Wallström, Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, for being able to lead all the consultative process and eventually providing the world with such an important instrument. We recognize your personal commitment and able leadership in the process that made this a reality. I'm glad to inform you that the AU heads of state and governments have taken a concrete step by endorsing a resolution to revise the current extended program of action for the implementation of the Africa Regional Strategy for DRR in line with the post-2015 framework for DRR, the recently adopted Sendai Framework. This is a clear demonstration of Africa's continued commitment to disaster risk reduction. I further wish to inform you that the 7th Africa Working Group meeting on DRR with a high-level segment is planned to take place in Yaoundé, Cameroon from 21st to 23rd July 2015 and is expected to adopt a roadmap and concrete follow-up actions to guide this revision process and facilitate effective implementation of the Sendai Framework on our continent. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, effective implementation of Sendai Framework and the post-2015 Africa Program of Action requires sustained and predictable resources. The financial support that the European Union has provided through its EU ACP DRR program, building disaster resilience to natural hazards in Sub-Saharan African regions, countries and communities, will definitely play a critical role in this regard. The program, with a funding envelope of 80 million euros over 5 years, aims to strengthen the resilience of Sub-Saharan Africa regions and countries and communities to the impacts of disasters, including the potential impacts of climate change, in order to reduce poverty and promote sustainable development. The program is based on 5 results areas and will be implemented by African Union Commission, by UNISDR, by the World Bank Global Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction, and Africa Development Bank. At this juncture, the African Union Commission would like to take this opportunity to thank the European Union and the Secretariat of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific Group of States for being in the forefront to provide Africa with this concrete means of implementation, support, alignment of the Africa Program of Action with the Sendai Framework on the continent. This support would also help to implement the visions of Africa's vision. It will contribute to the vision of Africa, which is Agenda 2063. That is the Africa we want. I would like to mention that strong coordination among implementing partners and linkages between the 5 result areas of the program are key to ensuring effective implementation of the EU ACP DRR program. But also it will help in maximizing its impact. It is my fervent hope that all implementing partners will give due emphasis to this critical issue as we move forward with the implementation of the program. As I conclude this statement, it is my now honor and privilege to declare this EU ACP DRR program, Building Disaster Resilience to Natural Hazards in Sub-Saharan African Regions, Countries and Communities, officially launched. I thank you for your kind attention.
And thank you very much for officially launching and also the interest of the African Union in supporting disaster risk reduction. We have We have found our European Commission colleagues, so please actually come forward. So Mr. Roberto Rodolfo, he's a Director of DevCo, Sustainable Growth and Development. He's come here to provide some opening statements. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I must apologize as our High Representative has been blocked with the Iran negotiations, which is a good news, means that a deal is being sought very hard. And also we want to announce that yesterday, as you know, a deal was reached on Greece, but that's why Commissioner Mimica sends me to salute you and to deliver his remarks, because he has to replace the High Representative in other bilaterals with the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. Honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished panelists, the African Union Commissioner for Agriculture, and the adoption of the new Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction earlier this year represented a major step forward. With the current Financing for Development Conference, we are now moving towards the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals in New York in September and to a new climate deal in Paris at the end of the year. This 2015 will be remarkably historical. Our goal is to ensure that resilience and the links between disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, both in policy and in practice, are an integral part of those discussions as the decisions taken will shape the years ahead. The European Union is tackling climate and disaster risk reduction by mainstreaming climate adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk management into focal sectors such as agriculture, urban development, energy, and others. However, all 3 climate-related issues are also the subject of targeted interventions. European Union support to specific disaster risk reduction programs has been channeled primarily through the financial envelope for Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific countries, with a total amount of 180 million euros provided. This is in line with priority areas of the EU strategy for supporting disaster risk reduction in developing countries. Since 2013, we have also been implementing an action plan for resilience in crisis-prone countries. Our common objective is to accelerate the effective implementation of the African Comprehensive Disaster Risk Reduction and Risk Management Framework and to build resilience at all levels. I salute and congratulate the leadership of the African Union Commission on this. This demonstrates that climate change and disasters are not be stopped by boundaries, and therefore the integration at continental level is of utmost importance for us. It is a good opportunity to share with you today the details of the program and its role in strengthening disaster resilience in Africa. The panelists, our implementing partners, will provide certainly details, and the discussion will be quite interesting. We work closely with a number of partners already mentioned, the ACP Group of States, the African Union Commission, the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, the World Bank Group Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, and the African Development Bank. Of course, they are not only partners in this kind of action, they are partners in many different actions, but the combination of these partners in this particular project tells you the complexity, the intertwined relations between financial issues, between emergency actions and responses, but most importantly, local capacity, building local capacity. That's why, Commissioner, Your Excellency, we salute your leadership on this. This partnership is a good example of the multiple facets of resilience, an approach we intend to pursue in the various strands in the international negotiation this year. Weather, water, and climate-related hazards, in particular droughts, floods, storms, and cyclones, dominate the disaster profile of Sub-Saharan Africa, with serious implications in the socio-economic development of the region. A holistic approach to building disaster resilience and to secure development gains in Africa, based on accurate risk information and improved decision support systems, was thus necessary. The program proposes a complete cycle of measures on disaster risk management and capacity building. This is done through risk identification and assessment, risk reduction and preparedness, risk financing, and resilient recovery and reconstruction. The African Union Commission will have the responsibility and the leadership to ensure the coherence of this program, and will work in close coordination with the other implementing partners and all the other partners involved in this endeavor, such as the RECs, Regional Economic Communities, the African Regional Climate Centers, and all the participating sub-Saharan countries. This program will complement the existing and planned resilience-related interventions at the national and regional level, including those in the framework of SHAR, supporting the Horn of Africa resilience, and AGIR, the Global Alliance for Resilience Initiative in the Sahel. We call these two initiatives, SHARE and AGIR, flagships of the European Union intervention. Because this approach on resilience that we have spearheaded since now many years will feature prominently in Paris in December as the most important climate-smart adaptation and as the most important integration between climate change adaptation and indeed disaster risk reduction. Natural hazards cannot be avoided. However, long-term management and risks in the context of a fast-changing climate can save lives and livelihoods and set the foundations for sustainable development. While governments hold the key responsibility for resilience, organizations such as the European Union and the African Union are committed to do more to assist and implement, as local institutions need to continue building their capacities to meet their responsibilities. We look forward to talking to this work force into the future. As a small personal token on this, I can tell you that in my experience throughout Africa, and I was ambassador in Uganda recently, the disastrous effect of disasters is not only economical, it's even moral. It's even on the ethic and the spirit of reaction of the people. So the capacity of react is fundamental. The capacity of diminish the devastating effect of us is fundamental. And the capacity indeed to struggle against adversity makes nations and people stronger and more resilient, as we say. I indeed look forward to interact with you, and I thank you again for giving me these 2 minutes of word.
And thank you very much for those opening statements as well. Always very pleased to have the European Commission and DevCo in particular supporting this program. It has been a little bit of time in getting the partners together, so it's very good to see the partners now coming together to announce and forward this particular initiative and program. But let's hear from some of the other partners. I'd like to introduce, of course, Margareta Wallström, who's the Special Representative for Disaster Risk Reduction, to say a few words on behalf of the UN-ISDR partnership. Margareta?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Can I ask how much time we have? Because 2 2 minutes. Good, thank you very much. I think Her Excellency Madame Rhoda Pease and the director also, they have given you a good overview over the aspects of the program. So only to say that as far as UNISDR is concerned, we are particularly supporting the Africa Union Commission in the coordination segment. You heard Ms. Rhoda Pease emphasizing very strongly coordination both among the partners, but also you said coordination among the different elements, the 5 elements of it. So that's our result 1, is focused on through the architecture, as I call it, the regional platforms, the Africa Working Group, the regional economic communities support to there and the technical meetings, and very importantly, because it's growing strong in Africa, the national platforms for disaster risk reduction. So that's an important implementation, policy generating and knowledge generating architecture that the Africa Union Commission is supporting, and we with them. Second part, and I remember about a year or so ago, I asked Mrs. Rhoda Pease, what do you think is the most important thing that we, UNISDR, need to strengthen in Africa? So you said, you remember, public awareness and education. You have to do more. So that's the second thing we do as part of this work on coordination. And of course, we need everyone to collaborate on that, but continued advocacy everywhere with everyone through periodic reviews, publications, and products that help to concretize what is happening. And outreach to media, to policymakers, and in every different way. Without using much better all the accumulated knowledge that exists, we will not really be able to succeed in making what is a very wide, multi-sectoral, interdisciplinary issue. Disaster risk reduction is, of course, technical, but it's also an integrating policy agenda. So how to accumulate the knowledge, of course. We've been requested to create evidence-based knowledge and information, and we are doing that as UNISDR through a product which happens every 2 years, a global assessment report for disaster risk reduction. But of course, it's not UNISDR that does the knowledge. The knowledge comes from many of you who are here, different institutions in public and private sector, from our colleagues in the World Bank. And increasingly, we are now using all the data that is being collected in countries from national disaster loss databases, the national risk profiles, both on global, national data characteristics. So with this increasing capability that exists everywhere in understanding risk is the basis for that global report. But I should also add, it's not in my talking points, but I will add it, that we encourage regional disaster risk reports as well. We have a couple, we even have a sub-regional one. There are about 2 of them coming that have been generated as initiatives. And we have talked also with, of course, Africa about one. So when you are ready, I think that report will be a very good instrument also to generate knowledge and experience. I think I also would like to recognize the partners at the table, of course, Africa Union Commission and the Commissioner personally with a very strong commitment to the topic, but also the Africa Development Bank and the World Bank, of course, GFDRR, long-term partners, and many others. You know, driving an issue like disaster risk reduction requires that many drive together.